Hello and welcome to today's webcast, Rethinking Succession, Preparing for an Uncertain Future. I'm Amanda Popila and I'm a researcher in human capital here at the Conference Board. I am delighted to welcome you today and to be joined by our speaker, Eileen Gotchman, who I'll introduce in just a moment. But before I do so, I want to go over a few details about how you as a participant can join us and participate in today's webcast. First, please feel free to enter questions and comments into the chat box at the bottom of your screen. We'll also have a few polls throughout today's broadcast, so please look out for those and do participate. You can make the screen larger by clicking on the 4 arrows in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. At the end of today's webcast, you'll see a brief evaluation form. We do ask that you take just a moment to complete that evaluation. And we also will have a report available to you as a participant in the webcast. We'll explain a little bit more about that report later in the webcast, but please stay on until the end, fill out that evaluation, enter your contact information so that you receive that report. The webcast will be made available on demand following today's broadcast, so please look for that at conferenceboard.org. Feel free to share with your colleagues as well. And we are offering HRCI, SHRM, and CPE recertification credits if you're watching this broadcast live. So to receive your credits, please enter your name, email address, and the type of credit you need into that chat box at the bottom of the screen. And if you're looking for CPE credits specifically, you will need to check the box 3 times throughout today's presentation. So please do look at your screen, make sure that you're checking those boxes. So now let me shift gears and introduce today's presenter. Eileen Gotchman is Senior Client Partner at Korn Ferry Hay Group. Eileen leads their assessment and succession solutions, overseeing the strategy, portfolio, and community of consultants in these areas globally. So Eileen, thank you so much for being with us today, and let's get started.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. So glad to be here. So our topic today is about rethinking succession, how we can prepare for an uncertain future. If we think about the textbook case of succession, what we would do is do an early identification of our talent. We would nurture them for 10, maybe 20 years. We would think about different ways to rotate them into roles so they could get some more experiences. We would provide insights through assessments. At some point, we would narrow down our field, and we would be ready to select people for our senior roles, perhaps even for our most senior role as CEO. So this is something that would take place over a long period of time. But we're suggesting that now's a good time to really rethink this whole textbook succession process, because it's built on 2 different assumptions. One is that we know what's required for future success, and the other is that we know the talent we have. And we want to lay out why both of these assumptions may not be the case, because it's very difficult now with all that's changing in the future to know what we don't know. So there's a lot going on in terms of the forces of change in our environment, and these disruptive forces really impact the supply and demand of talent. And it means that we can't necessarily know 5 years, 2 years, certainly not a decade or 2 beforehand about the talent we're going to need, because those roles may change, the demands may change, the company strategy may change, labor supply and demand. All of these things are going to impact how we think about the future. So a way of thinking about this is to introduce a new idea, the idea of the DNA of succession. And you know with DNA that there are the 2 different strands, and we're suggesting 2 strands to consider. One is the talent strand, and the other is the role strand. And we'd like to go through and talk about these. So on the talent side, of course, we look at the workforce and how that's changing. And there's a couple of factors that we really need to think about millennials, about diversity, and about some of our new workforce models. So let's go through each one of them. The first has to do with the change in talent motivation. So if you're starting at the left, of course, we have all of the baby boomers and Generation X. These are the people who are in these senior roles right now. But the next generation talent is that third box from the left where the millennials are. That's our next generation talent. But one of the distinguishing features of the millennials is they're not as interested at moving up. They're more oriented around life experiences, about moving around. So if you think about our traditional model of succession, what do you do when the talent doesn't want to move up? Rather, they're more excited about having a diversity of experience. Well, speaking of diversity, we also know that there's a lot of things going on now on the talent side of the equation. There's much recognition in the news all around the world about how the needle's not moving fast enough, that companies haven't become the meritocracies, that there's quite a bit of unconscious bias, and we're starting to see some of the paradigm shift. We're starting to see at the top where boards and executive committees are getting comfortable with the discomfort about differences, and we're starting to see the whole idea of culture shift so that underrepresented talent can make its way into higher levels in the organization. So organizations are asking whether they have the right mix of talent to implement their business strategy and whether the mix that they have now is one that's working well.
So Eileen, on this point, the conference board, we just had our Women's Leadership Conference. It's our annual conference on women's leadership.
Yes.
Last week, actually. And so this is kind of top of mind for me. With the Me Too movement in the media and all of the pay inequalities that we know with gender, are you seeing this an increased focus on gender at the executive level or at the board level?
Absolutely. There is an interest in having women talent. I'm going to talk a little bit more further on in the presentation about a new study we've done about women CEOs. But in general, we're seeing as organizations go through their talent reviews, they're realizing that some of the talent processes that they've had in place over the last decade haven't given them the gender diversity that they want. And some of them are trying to address this by accelerating development of those lower down in the organization. Others are trying to address this by perhaps recruiting from the outside. But absolutely, there's been a resurgence of interest in this topic.
Great, thank you.
The other factor that we need to think about is that there's a lot of new workforce models now. People are moving around back and forth at companies. There's a resurgence of mergers and acquisitions now. So there's almost, when companies are coming together, there's a doubling up of talent. Talent's becoming more cross-functional. And probably the biggest workforce model change is the contingent workforce. And what we're seeing now is people who are working in the gig economy, people are working in new and different ways in terms of their relationship with an employer. And so this, of course, impacts how we think about succession. Do succession candidates have to be the people who are in your organization for a while, the way we've traditionally thought about it in the past? So it's time to start thinking about the new talent pool. Let's move for a minute to the role strand, because roles are changing too. What's going to be required in the future in terms of some of the skills or competencies, some of the personality traits and the motivations or drivers, those are going to change because we're going to need some different configurations for success in the future. There's also going to be changes already in place, some new organizational configurations, as well as changes in technology. So let's go through a couple of these. So as we think about leadership demands, we think about a couple of things that are likely to happen as we move forward. One is, of course, the increase in globalization, needing leaders who have a global perspective, have more cultural agility, more open, more flexible. Need more innovative leaders, people who are not only going to be able to use technology, but have a mindset where they are able to think about problems as something to overcome. We also need change leaders. So as we're seeing this rapid pace of change, how can our leaders get in front of and prepare for these changes and make these rapid shifts of their business model? And so in this very dynamic environment, we need people who can be quite flexible. And then, of course, leaders who can thrive as growth leaders, that in a new complex global environment, they're very open to all ideas coming from different sources and are able to still sustain growth. So we know there's going to be some changes in leaders. There's also going to be changes in terms of configurations. And I was alluding to this earlier with the workforce models. Who is it that works for our organization anymore? When you go into companies these days, you see people who have the name tags, but they may not actually be on the payroll. They might be contractors. They might be people who have been hired for a temporary assignment. They could be people that your company has an alliance with. In other words, the boundaries are becoming very permeable. And so who is in your organization and what it means to work for a company is changing. So as you're thinking about your talent in terms of succession, why do we just do talent reviews and think about the talent in terms of the people who actually get the paycheck, when we're actually running our company with people who come from a much broader perspective than just those that are on the payroll? And we also need to think about the impact of emerging technologies. So, no secret, a lot more robotics, automation, machine learning, and so on. These impact all of our jobs, not just those who work in manufacturing or as companies are becoming more digital. Those of us on the call who are from HR see the impact of technologies in terms of how we can identify people, how we can move them ahead, how we can really know our talent. And I'm going to say a little bit more about that a little bit later on. So one of the questions that we think about is how can succession work in the digital age? In the past, we've had people, as I mentioned, who really try to build their careers through their expertise. Get more and more and more expert, so you're the person that knows it all. You're the person who can lead by virtue of that expertise. Now, with the rapid changes and more to come in the future, you don't have to be the expert anymore. What you need to be, quote, an expert on is building your network, knowing where you can go and who you can go to get the input that you need, so as the environment shifts, you are able to really bring together the best ideas and move things forward. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how we prepare for an uncertain future. 5 recommendations that we want to offer up. So first one is about capturing success using success profiles. So a lot of organizations talk about this concept of success profiles, and what they mean is a job description. So we're not talking about a job description here. We're talking about something that describes what will be required for success in the future, in a time where we can't necessarily know, but we're making our best guess based on the company's strategy, based on the culture and values that we want to have. What does that future look like? And we're also describing more than just the skills or the competencies that are going to be required. So we suggest that you need to consider 4 factors as part of that success profile. You need to think about the skills, of course, that are going to be required in the future, but also the kinds of experiences. Then looking at the bottom left, think about the personality traits. And then on the bottom right, the motivators. Typically, the competencies and the experiences are the ones that are most noticeable. It's what you see when you're interviewing someone, looking at resumes for their experiences. It's typically what gets people jobs and what gets them promoted. But it's the traits and the drivers that are the ones that are most important for success. When we talk about people derailing, most often it's because of the traits and drivers. So why not incorporate all 4 of those as you're thinking about future success, so that you are hiring and developing and grooming and getting ready your future workforce around all 4 of these quadrants?
Eileen, so you're
Yeah.
talking about what a leader needs in a digital environment. Can you give some examples? What are these competencies or traits or drivers that they'll need?
Okay. So, okay, sorry. Okay, so as we talk a little bit about the success profiles, here's one that we've come up with based on our research around digital leaders. So just listing some of the competencies, some of the traits, some of the drivers that are needed in the future. And you can see that there's a lot around agility and becoming more agile. There's also people who can relate to conflicting demands and understand how to manage very flexibly in the future, and that tension about the unknown versus the unknown. And also need people who are going to look on the outside and not just look inside, but understand that there are other firms that have moved along in terms of being a digital leader. And those other companies have something to teach you and should look on the outside. So if I had to kind of summarize all this down to three things, it would be around agility, it would be around the flexibility of handling competing demands, and it would be around that external focus. So I moved ahead a slide. I'm going to move back to our polling question.
First poll. Yep. So can we pull up the first poll? Okay. So this is where we need your help. Our first question is, how often does your organization currently capture the personality traits and motivational drivers required for future success in critical roles? So I see we have some people answering. So we'll give a couple minutes and close this poll. While we're giving everyone a minute to answer this question, we do have a question from the audience. What would you define? How would you define a digital leader, Eileen?
Okay, so the as I indicated on the prior slide, it is a person who has some of those qualities of the agility for the future, someone who is able to really understand the competing demands, and someone who has that external focus as being three of the characteristics, obviously within the framework of a digital strategy. So the digital leader is someone who is part of a company that is trying to either move from a pre-digital to a digital strategy, or in a company, maybe in a startup or something that is starting up as a digital. But what's important from our perspective is the qualities that leader has in terms of the personality traits, the motivations, and the competencies.
Great, thank you. So can we pull up that prior slide again? I see we do have, it looks like our answers are locked in, and about half of respondents said rarely or never, and most of the other half said sometimes. So there's very few that said most or all the time.
So we would urge, actually let's go back to our slide deck just to talk a little bit about these polling results. If we could bring up, thank you. As you think about a success profile and how it might fit within the talent life cycle, the success profile, if you start up about 1 o'clock on this circle, you can use the success profile for selecting people, onboarding them, obviously developing them. We're talking about here today around succession. It can help you in organization design when you realize that the jobs that you have may not create the experiences that you need. So we see this all the time in organizations that say they want people to have P&L experience, but the gap between the lower level jobs and how you get the P&L experience is so large that the only way they can get people with P&L experience is to hire from the outside. So there may be an org design implication. You can use them for career mapping, for your structure, for rewards, and of course assess people against them. So I bring this up in light of the polling because given that we know that the personality traits and the drivers really are so important for people being successful in their jobs and are a key source of derailers, if your success profile doesn't include all of those factors, you can mishire, misselect, you can develop people for the wrong things, you can select the wrong people for a succession, you can, as you move people through different careers, you can make mistakes in rewarding and so on. So the point here is the success profile is absolutely critical as your compass for how you want to go through the whole talent life cycle. And if you're stopping just on the competency quadrant, you're missing some of the things that we know are critical for success. So sounds like so many of the people on this webinar, there may be an opportunity to think a little bit more broadly. So that's the first recommendation about success profiles. The second one is the importance of agility. So I mentioned agility before as it pertained to a digital leader, but not every organization is trying to become more digital or is digital already. So let's just think more broadly about what learning agility is. So we define it as the ability and willingness to learn the right lessons from experience and to apply those to new situations. So these are people who know what to do when they don't know what to do. In other words, they are not constantly looking back and applying the same lessons over and over and over again. They're willing to get out of their comfort zone. They recognize that there's something different about this situation, and they need to learn something new, do something different. I'm sure that everyone on this call has seen leaders that go from job to job to job with the same exact playbook. They learn something once, it worked well for them, and they just keep reapplying it and reapplying it and reapplying it. And what we're saying here is, given the uncertainties about the future, we believe that you need to bring people in who are more agile, and you need to hang on to them because you may need them in the future, given the uncertainty about where your company is going. So let's stop and do a little poll here.
Yep, can we bring up the second polling question? Okay, how often does your organization currently use learning agility as a factor in acquiring, developing, and/or deploying talent? So we're getting results in, it again, looks like never or hardly ever, and sometimes. Eileen, is that what you see?
Yeah. Yes.
In the work that you do?
And it's good. I'm really happy to see that organizations are sometimes using agility. That's terrific, particularly for what might be defined as critical roles. So this is a very encouraging polling. Let's go back to our slide deck for a minute, and let's just look. What might an agile success profile look like? So for those of you that are not using it, think about what it would be like if you created something like this in your organization, where you defined some of the competencies, maybe some of the experiences that are specific to your organization, some of the personality traits or the drivers that might be useful to you. And if you again think back at the slide I showed a few minutes ago with the circle, you could, if you created this success profile, you could use it in recruiting, you can use it as you're onboarding and all the way through your talent cycle. Now, we know that not everybody is an agile leader. So it's just in terms of being out there in the population, there's not a large percentage, which is why it's so important, if this is important to your organization's success, and we think it is, that you find and hold on to those leaders and you make sure you know who they are in your organization so that they can be key people part of your future thinking about succession.
So we're getting a few questions here. How do you test for learning agility?
So there are different ways that you can do that. There are assessments that get at the competencies, traits, and drivers. So you can do assessments that are online self-report. You can do 360s to get at the competency part of it. And you can create interview questions that also get at the underlying traits and the drivers especially. We recommend using multiple methods, so there's lots of organizations that use a combination of interview plus online in order to do that. When we're doing talent reviews with our clients, we help the leaders understand what an agile leader looks like so that they can identify people in their own groups that have high learning agility, because there will be characteristics that you see. Like, let's just look for a minute at some of the traits. You know, people who are curious, there's various ways that manifests itself. These are the people in meetings, you know, always asking questions, always wondering, why can't we do it this way? Why do we do it that way? People who are more willing to take, you know, the risks. People who are much more open to change. So there's a number of ways that learning agility shows up in the workplace, and you can sort of on a scale to the most informal to quite formal, or less rigorous to more rigorous, you can use different approaches to try to identify it.
Great. So we have another question. I think the question is asking, in job evaluation, can you use agility, can you use these competencies to evaluate someone that's already in a role? And are there issues with doing that?
So for job evaluation, if I'm understanding the question right, you'd want to describe what is required for that role today. And so you need to know whether that role requires agility. If it requires agility, that right now, then you can assess incumbents and you can assess potential successors for it. Yes, but you would need to make sure that it really is required for the role. And I want to emphasize that that point, because if you look at some of the characteristics of agile leaders, they are people who often are quite comfortable with change and are open to new ideas and a lot of curiosity. So they tend not to do very well in a role where everything is laid out step by step by step, and their role is to follow the book. Because they're the ones that are going to keep asking the annoying questions about, why do we do it this way? And had you ever thought about, and if they have a manager who is not learning Agile, often the two of them just clash with one another. So you have to really think about what's required in a role. When you put a highly learning Agile person in a role that doesn't require agility, they're unhappy, they can be disruptive, it can impact their performance, and sometimes they exit the organization. So the fit between the person and the role is really what's critical here.
Great. We're seeing some agreement online. So
okay, good.
One last question. Can we use
sure.
these profiles as long as they are attributed to Korn Ferry?
Can we use these? Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Well, yeah, we are sharing the I'm making this deck available to everyone. Absolutely. Thank you for asking that. Okay, so third recommendation is around finding the hidden leaders. So a couple recommendations within this about making sure you are really searching far and wide and are trying to tackle the unconscious bias, and making sure that development is appropriately tailored to the individual needs, as opposed to the peanut butter one-size-fits-all, because everybody's needs are very different. And I guess I just thought of another comment I want to make about the person who asked whether we could, you could use the profile. Yes, you can use them, but these are generic, and these profiles don't apply to your strategy because they are generic, and they may not be what you need. So sort of just beware. I mean, use them to spark your thinking, but not to take them as whole cloth, because they may not be appropriate. And if you have a success profile that's not right for your organization, you're going to develop people who aren't a fit for where you want to go. So I just want to add that caveat. Okay, back to you with our poll question.
All right, can we pull up the third polling question? Okay, how often does your organization currently follow a process for tackling unconscious bias when doing succession planning? Okay, it looks like a similar trend here, never or hardly ever, is the most common result. And sometimes.
Okay, well, definitely room for improvement here. Absolutely, this is even more clear-cut on the never side than the other polling questions. So this is going to be a hot topic, which is, I think, a good lead into the next slide that we want to show about the study that we just did. Korn Ferry got hired by the Rockefeller Foundation to do a study about women CEOs. This is part of the Rockefeller Foundation's mission to increase the number of women CEOs. And they wanted to understand, how did current women CEOs get to where they are? So we interviewed almost all of the current sitting women CEOs, and as well as some who are retired, former women CEOs. So we covered about 80% of the universe. And we also gave them one of our online assessments, KF4D, and analyzed the results. And I want to give you a quick summary of them. And then Amanda's going to talk later about how you can get the copy of the report. But there's a couple of lessons here, which is why I want to bring it up in this webcast, in terms of how we think about succession. What we learned from the women is that they didn't set out to become CEOs. They didn't have this desire that, when I grow up, I want to be a CEO. For many of them, it had never, ever occurred to them until some senior person, a mentor, or someone else more senior in the organization said, you could be a CEO. That idea hadn't occurred to them. What they were interested in is seeking challenging jobs. And so they often would take those tough tasks or roles to the overseas locations, the turnarounds, the startups, the things that no one else wanted to do. Very motivated by purpose and culture, and tended to speak about we, always giving others credit for their contribution. As a result of that, oftentimes the women found that they were undervalued in terms of their accomplishments. And you see on the bottom right-hand corner, there's this phrase, results assured, packaging needed. What that is a summary of is the women consistently were getting results, but they weren't branding themselves in terms of the people who got the results, because they were always saying we and talking about how everybody else contributed to it. We found there was no single path to the top, a lot of different career rotations and experiences. And if you had to look at what the background experiences were, most of them came from STEM, a broad business background, economics background, or in finance. The reason I wanted to bring this up here is many organizations, as part of their talent reviews, ask the managers, does such and such a person, Mary Jones, are they interested in advancing? Do they want to become an executive? And having facilitated and sat in on hundreds of these talent reviews, a lot of the time we hear managers say, nope, I've never heard her mention that. And that then becomes a, quote, fact that is almost written into stone. Because the person didn't come forward and say that that was what their career ambition was, it gets taken as a given that they don't have that motivation and drive. And so we're always saying back to the managers when they say that is, how do you know? Did you talk to them? Have you talked to them about the possibilities for their future? And there's a related subset of this, which is what happens when, for a variety of reasons, women may not be able to take a new job at a certain point in time. Maybe they can't relocate. It could be because they have childcare responsibilities, or maybe they have a spouse, or their kids are in high school and they don't want to move. Again, sometimes in the talent reviews, that gets written in is they don't want the next job, and then that's written in stone. So want to make sure that we think very broadly, and we talk about finding the hidden talent, that we don't let some of these unconscious biases come into play, which is what narrows that talent pool for the future.
So how?
Yeah, let me go back.
Yeah, so we have a couple questions here.
Okay.
One is, how do we tackle unconscious bias, especially when we have so little time with senior leaders to talk about succession planning anyway? So how do we tackle this without monopolizing more time?
Yeah. So one of the ways that we do it is, let's assume maybe as part of your talent review process, you create a 9-box, a 4-box. There's something visual where you're putting names and categorizing. We like to show that visual and often do color coding of showing diversity in different ways. It could be male versus female. You have 2 different colors showing where people are. Or it could be people who are new to the organization, people who've been around a while, or people who are located in headquarters, or people are not. Because when you do that color coding, oftentimes the managers laugh nervously because they can then visually see the pattern, that everyone who's rated high potential turns out to be those who work in headquarters, been here a long time, male, worked for the main company before they acquired others, and so on. And when they see that pattern, they often themselves say, okay, yes, let's go back and look more broadly. Who might we have overlooked? Do we have other data? Should we bring in performance data? Should we bring in assessment data? And so that's when you can get really the best outcome, is when there's awareness on the part of the leaders. So if that's not something that you've tried, you might try, and that takes 5 minutes to create that awareness in the meeting. I have had situations where leaders don't see it, and I'll have to explain what that color coding is, but it is very, very powerful. And when they start to ask themselves, why do we have all of our high potentials that graduated from this one school, or that all come out of engineering, and so on, is that really what's required with success? So I think a couple of well-placed questions can help build that awareness.
Thanks. Yeah.
In the moment.
I think that's a great idea, because that data is available. I mean, it's very clear when you lay it out, and the idea of color coding is great to show that difference. So I also want to mention at this point, this is the report that is available to attendees of today's webinar. So I do want to remind you, at the end of the broadcast, we have a short evaluation. There's a place to leave your contact information. So if you do want access to this report, please be sure to fill out that evaluation. Okay.
Good. And it's a report that your senior leaders may find interesting too.
Absolutely.
Okay, so 4th recommendation, zigzag careers. The point here is that since the future's unknown and we don't know exactly what experiences people are going to need for the future, we ought to, at least with some of our people, enable them to go back and forth across what might be silos, across functional areas, start in engineering, go to sales. From sales, go into human resources, and do have zigzags, which are not always upward. In fact, they could not only be lateral, they could actually be you go down before you go up. This fits beautifully with where the next generation of talent, their desire for getting experiences. So this zigzag idea is something that they will really embrace. Okay, so now we have a polling question.
All right, let's pull up the next poll. How often does your organization currently consider employees with unconventional career paths when doing succession planning?
Oh, it's looking good here.
Okay.
Good. That is great. That's very, very good to hear. And we'd like to obviously see that number go up, but it looks like almost 3/4 of the people here are doing that. So sounds like on that recommendation, our audience that is already there. That's terrific. Okay, so we'll go back to our slides. Yeah. Okay, so the point of this slide is just to say that as you think about where your functional leaders are coming from, they're going to need different skill sets, maybe a turn in finance, maybe a turn in IT, or possibly in sales. The more breadth of experience that the functional leaders have, the more they are able to bring different perspectives in, and they're able to work with leaders and the other functional areas. And so things become less siloed because they've sat in those other chairs. So something important to think about, which sounds like most of the audience is doing. Okay, fifth one, knowing your people and understanding the value that they bring. So we have, increasing amounts of data about our people, just because of all of the information that we are collecting. And, obviously with social media, it's possible to go out to social media sites as you are hiring and learn more about people. On LinkedIn, where people are entering their own information, people are also putting in their affiliations, their hobbies, their interests, who they're connected with. So the amount of information that you can know about the people that you either want to hire or that you have already is tremendous. And that leads us to wonder whether HR is really the new IT. Because HR is going to really be able to leverage data to make predictions in the future. HR should be the function that people turn to in order to think about, well, where's the talent that we have? Where are we going to go to find them? Who's a good fit? How should we structure the roles? And being adept at handling all of those data analytics is an increasing skill set. And I'm sure that many of the people on the phone, on the webcast, are already thinking about this, but we should check by going to our polling.
All right, let's pull up, I think this is the last polling question. How often does your organization currently use artificial intelligence for acquiring, developing and or deploying talent? And so it's looking like not very often.
Okay, well, that's very interesting, because obviously there's a lot of buzz around artificial intelligence and using it to make predictions. So let's go back to our slide deck and maybe talk about this a little bit more.
And Eileen, how are you defining artificial intelligence versus talent analytics?
Yeah, so the artificial intelligence is really more oriented around making predictions. And maybe we can just spend a few minutes on this page, because this is quite a hot topic these days. If you think about commercially available apps and other sorts of software that's out there in the world, right now you can find people using artificial intelligence. I mean, LinkedIn, Facebook uses the algorithms. You can match. You can, all the dating apps are all about matching and using artificial intelligence or the algorithms. So the use of algorithms is really what's critical here. People can be developed using algorithms, and think about how you can assess people, identify the gaps, and then predict what it is that they're going to need in order to be developed. Prediction, that part of artificial intelligence is well entrenched out there. I mean, that's what Spotify is all about with Amazon. Anytime it's, if you like this movie, if you like this music, if you like this piece of clothing, you'll like something else. That's all using the algorithms and artificial intelligence in order to predict. So right now, in separate pieces, there are options available to find, match, develop, and predict. We have not yet seen this pulled all the way through in the human resources field, but it's only a matter of time. In other words, there are some companies that are using algorithms to find people. They are using algorithms to match people to roles, less so on the development side, but also trying to predict which of our people is more likely to be successful in the future. So we're going to expect to see this going forward, and we can also expect that our leaders are going to be talking more about this because they're moving that way in terms of products and services, and there's so much in the popular press about this. But we know through the new European privacy regulations that are coming out, which there's a lot of buzz now in the US about protection of privacy and who owns your data, that there's some concerns about, well, who owns the data and how do you store it, and is it forever, and who can use it. So there's obviously some risks. But countering that, we have some different norms by generation about sharing information. We have the younger entrants into the workforce who will talk very openly, for example, about their pay, whereas people who are older didn't grow up in that environment of being comfortable. So when you're trying to create a policy about sharing of data, you have a lot of different generations in your workplace.
So I was just going to ask about this. So you showed the slide earlier that had the two people, and we can know all of these things about our people. Do we actually want to know all of that information? Is it helping us to find the right talent, or is it just a big risk?
Well, it can be helpful, but you have to be careful about it. So if I could put up a yellow light, proceed with caution onto this, because there's a lot of danger in using artificial intelligence as predictors. I heard a lawyer recently say that artificial intelligence is the full employment regulation for lawyers. Because when you create algorithms, you are putting all of your data, into a black box to identify which of those variables are the best predictors of whatever outcome you want. So I've heard so many stories about organizations that say, oh, these are our successful leaders. Let's put in everything that we know about them and see what the best predictors are. And lo and behold, what comes out are things like what sports they played, what college they went to, having a male name instead of a female name. It's exactly the issue that's come up with Facebook about how the world gets smaller and smaller and smaller, that you end up with having the predictors be exactly what you have now, let's say, in your executive suite. And, the whole theme of what we're talking about today is being prepared for an uncertain future. So if you use as your outcome measure what you're trying to predict, the people that you have now, are you going to end up with the same people who may not be prepared? And are you going to end up with characteristics that are in the black box that aren't really the characteristics that you need for the future? So I would say, yes, the world is heading that way, but that we should proceed very, very carefully. And when you talk with firms that say, we can do a great job of prediction, make sure you open up that black box and look inside and make sure you understand what exactly it is that's creating those predictions. So it's the future, but proceed with full knowledge and with caution. So maybe the fact that there were about 75% of the people that aren't there yet is that way of proceeding with caution, to be looking into it and seeing how it makes sense to use artificial intelligence in your organization, and making sure before you're ready that you understand how you're going to protect privacy and what all of the risks are. I was at a conference recently where many people in human resources was talking about almost all of the inquiries about artificial intelligence come from their line managers, who, whether it's because of the apps and so on that they use on their phones, or maybe they hear something in the news, get this, what they consider to be a great idea of applying it to human resources. And some of it is to take the manager out of having to do people things. Like, wouldn't it be great if somebody told us which people to promote or how much to pay them? And so, again, need to proceed with caution.
Yes. So what about, so things are changing very quickly, right? We're getting new technology. What about the organizations that say, we can't predict the future. We don't even know what skills we're going to need in 5 years. So, you know, is it really worth it to even try to predict?
So yes, predict in the way of knowing that you're going to need more agile people. So these are people who will adjust better to that uncertain future environment. So that's going to be, you know, sort of one thing. And then the zigzag career path. So putting those agile people through a very broad career development experience so that they have built the skills and the experiences. So now talking about, you know, some of the competency experiences, traits and drivers that they're going to need, so that as the future changes, you have people who would be ready for a future role, no matter what that would be, that they're able to adapt to that future. So great question.
Terrific. I'm just scrolling through our questions. I don't know that we got to all of them. There were a lot of comments coming in, so that's terrific. And if we didn't get to your question, please feel free to email us after the program, and we'll make sure that we answer your questions. We do have a couple minutes if anyone has any last comments online. Okay. We do have one last question. So, are personality tests the only way to accurately predict traits and drivers? Are there other approaches that you would recommend?
So you can. So I'll say that they are probably the best way. But as I was mentioning earlier, you can try to look for behavioral examples of some of the traits. So you can, in interviewing, pick up on them. And part of what we do in talent review is to, particularly around traits related to agility, look and see whether or not people are demonstrating things like curiosity, whether or not they are people who seem to be leading change. But, you know, the risk, I'm sure everybody in the call knows, the risk of an error is higher with the less scientific approaches. So you can do that, but depending on who's providing that information, it's possible to be wrong. And, you know, I know this from having done a lot of talent reviews where leaders will say, here's the group of people that we've identified as being very agile. And then we take that group of people and do an online assessment of agility with them. And you find a certain proportion of them are not, in fact, highly agile. In fact, some of them may be quite more on the, what we call like the depth type leader. And then you'll find people who have not been identified who really should be. So the possibilities of error. So I'm giving a kind of another cautious answer here. Yes, it is possible. But just sort of know the risks of misidentification, of over-identifying or under-identifying. And the under-identification is something important to consider in light of our conversation about unconscious bias. Because when, let's just say, a male versus female asks a question, it might come across differently in the eyes of the person hearing it. For the male, it could be seen as curiosity. For the female, it could be seen as they're less skilled or don't know the answer. So there are a lot of subtleties to just relying on managers.
Thank you. And What about how would an organization decide whether to look at succession plannings for job families versus an individual job?
Oh, I love that question. So the job families is a terrific idea because it really gets at this whole idea about uncertainty. And I might suggest that you even think about it, not just necessarily like if by families we mean sort of silos going up and down, but we also think about it across. There's many organizations now that are creating success profiles for C-suite, for officers, for directors, general managers, and so on, trying to take kind of across a certain level what is going to be required. And those would become sort of the core of the success profile, and then you can add specificity for a particular role. But it's a way of thinking about how are we going to get our next pool of officers or directors, that there's certain things that we want all of them to have, let's say like an enterprise mindset. So great way to get into this way of thinking is to not do it role by role.
Perfect. Well, Eileen, thank you so much for your time today. I think we're coming up to the end. And for everyone online, thank you for your questions and comments. I know we did not get to everything, but we really appreciate the time that you're taking to ask those questions. So you do see Eileen's contact information is on this slide. Feel free to reach out to her if you have additional questions, or if you'd like that report, you can reach out to Eileen directly, or you can complete that evaluation that will be up on your screen in just a moment. So please do take the time to respond to that as well. This recording will be made available on demand by the end of today. So if you missed something or want to share with colleagues, please look on conferenceboard.org on our website to find that recording. Save the date. We have our annual Succession Management Conference coming up in November. So if you register early, you do get a discount. So please visit our website and look into that conference. And finally, we have a few related resources on this topic. So if you are a member of the conference board or interested in checking us out, then take a look at some of those links and see what else we have available. I think that's it for today. Eileen, thank you again for being with us.
Thank you. This is very enjoyable.
And thank you, everyone online, for being with us today as well. Thanks for your participation. And I'm Amanda Popila from the conference board, and we'll see you next time.